first met Lou, he was being the arbiter of which community was going to be named most intelligent of the year. And I thought to myself, what a job. You would get to travel around visiting the top cities in the world on their best behavior, telling you exactly why they are the most.
Yeah, not you.
They are the most intelligent. Yes, Arlington, of course, was on its best behavior as well. But Lou is a thinker who's ahead of his time. He was a businessman. He was involved in satellite technology and communications. Had the idea way back in the 90s sometime, the internet is barely there, the World Wide Web is barely there, and he's thinking that, hey, this kind of technology could actually transform cities and economic development, and put his money where his mouth was at the time, and started a foundation with his collaborators that is now known as the Intelligent Community Forum. And I think he also established a framework early on that we're all still starting to live up to and recognize as the way forward for the new urban millennium. And it combines connectivity, innovation, an educated workforce, and all in a model that shares in the benefits of these things across society. So it's a great model. It rings true to all the things that we've been talking about in the various groups that are represented here in the Ballston BID Business Improvement District, in the county, Arlington County is here. And what we asked Lou to do was to think about and talk to us about the role of the university in this emerging world of intelligent communities. And I'm really pleased that there are at least 4 universities represented in the room here. So Virginia Tech, the Naval Postgraduate School, that's co-located with us here. University of Virginia, it's co-located with us in Falls Church. And also George Washington is here with the facility right next door. So Lou, you can say things, but we're going to get you. And we also have members of the business community. So really pleased that you guys can come out. I'm looking forward to a really interesting talk and then some discussion. Okay, and we will have continued refreshments when we're done. So with that, I want to welcome Lou Zacharilla, co-founder of the Intelligent Community Forum.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Nick, and thank you for doing my thinking for me. Now I know what I'm thinking, and he's always so articulate about it. So I appreciate it. And I also I want to thank Virginia Tech, for having me here today, and for you folks spending so much time, because really the fun part of my job is I get to ask questions, and I've been spending all day kind of doing that, and it's really been a thrill. So thank you, and also thank you to Arlington County for giving me a passport to come back in from New York. It's always a pleasure to be here. But I want to thank. Good for one day. Depends how the speech goes. Hi, how are you? So again, thank you, and congratulations to all of you, because you are a top 7 city, and I'll tell you what that means in a second. Because the group here is so diverse, I'm going to actually talk about the intelligent community movement at a rather high level, just so you get a sense of what's happening in the world, where Arlington County and your institutions fit into it, and why many people in the world are looking at you as a model for the community of the 21st century. So that's what I'm going to try to accomplish today. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'm a New Yorker. You can boo me. We call that the Bronx cheer. So I will start off on that. World's certainly changing, and so are communities. Nick mentioned satellites. If you were to take a satellite photograph, which this is, of the Korean Peninsula tonight, this is what you would see. This is an actual photograph. Now, usually, I actually have put North and South Korea on there, the words, because when I used to give this speech to American college students and ask where this was, they would say Florida. So I started doing this. I didn't have to do that here, of course, but it was not Arlington. It was not Arlington, but I just kept the slide anyway. But when we talk about the intelligent community movement, when we talk about the cities, when we talk about the new economy, this is a very good analogy, because I think the stakes are very high today for those of us who are engaged in economic development, academics, and local governance. The Korean Peninsula tonight will show you one thing, and again, I like to use very simple images. South Korea. We have two intelligent communities there, Suwon and the Gangnam district of Seoul. Tonight, it is lit up. There is economic activity. This is a culture that's thriving, that's celebrating its culture, that's doing all the things that we would want a community and a society to do. It is a free people that have gone from being the 8th poorest country in the world in 1974 to the 8th richest right now. And they've done it using a lot of the principles that we'll be talking about later. 16 miles north of the 38th parallel, as many of you know, you will see a place plunged into darkness. Okay? People always ask me, what's that little white dot there? And I always say, you know, it's the Redskins looking for their next Super Bowl. But again, yeah, that's right. But you can tell that one place is headed into the darkness and another one is moving toward the light. I believe that that's exactly what's going on in communities today, that communities have a choice. They can take some of the principles that we're talking about and that we've observed around the world, or they can continue to try to figure out, you know, how to go there by going backwards. And the consequences, I think, are horrendous. We like to say there are three ways that you get into the 21st century. You can go in there kicking and screaming because your company, or because the biggest company in the town has left, you've got high unemployment, and you can't find a way back. That's probably not the best way to go in, because at that point, you're in front of the firing squad, and pleading is your only way out. You can go by way of the 12th century, which we see a lot of communities and nations doing, but that seems to me the long way into the 21st. Or you can become an intelligent community. And there's a lot of virtues in that. Because what we're seeing today, again, is a trend. The train has left, but the railroad is still needed. We are seeing brain drain in every part of the world. And one of the reasons I got involved with this was simply because the center did not hold for a community that I grew up in upstate New York. Very small railroad community where my grandfather worked and raised 11 children on a railroad foreman salary. But within one generation, that railroad town, which had been a great place to grow up, had plunged into the darkness. And it still hasn't fully recovered. And that's happening, we found, all around the world. So we decided that we would try to do something about the vanishing communities. There's another trend that was emerging, we thought, around the same time, and it was interesting to hear Henry Kissinger, of all people, say something a couple of years ago that I found interesting, which is that in Europe, where the idea of the nation state formed, the state is losing its significance. So we're seeing that as a trend as well, that nation states, federal governments, and I'm not talking about anybody, you know, over here in Washington, but federal governments, national governments are not able to do the things that they once were able to do. The complex problems that they confront today are not solvable alone by the nation states. They're running out of money. Their policies really are not connecting with what the needs are in the community. So something very natural is happening. Human beings are doing exactly what you would expect human beings to do if a national or state government doesn't serve them anymore. They're relying on their own. I call it the new tribalism. But what it really means is that communities are beginning to take hold of their own destinies. They're saying to themselves, if we can't depend on this partner, then we're going to seize our own destiny, and we're going to have to figure out a way to do it. I saw this very vividly in Tahrir Square in November 2011. You know, I actually was there that night. I was going to give a speech the next day to a bunch of young Egyptian CEOs and entrepreneurs. I drove in. I was staying at the Intercontinental, which is actually overlooks Tahrir Square, and of course the riot was coming this way. But as I got closer, what I could see was this photograph. And, the more I looked at it, the more, I began to think about what Kissinger said and what was going on. And that is, these were young people, and I spoke with a lot of them, who were desperate for their community to revive, to do the types of things that's happening in Arlington County and a lot of other intelligent communities. And what they were saying by writing the word Facebook in graffiti on that storefront was, if you, Cairo, cannot give me the community that I want, I'm going to have to look somewhere else. In their case, they looked to Facebook, the fourth largest country on earth if you measure its population. But what they were looking for was community. So you can see this everywhere. And I just like that image. I don't know. Okay. Now there's another historical development that is emerging, which I think is in many ways the beginning of the new Renaissance, the salvation of the community. For the first time in human history, so far as we can tell, and we ask a lot of experts, including my mother, she agrees, she's the ultimate authority. Two things exist that never existed before. One is that a person, a human being, can live anywhere he or she wants. The second thing is that they can participate in a global economy. Those two conditions have really never existed side by side before. There are many reasons for that. However, what's necessary for those two things to connect so that person can have a rich social and economic experience is that you have to have a new railroad to connect to that global economy. When we started thinking about this, we discovered very quickly that the new railroad was the broadband infrastructure, the internet, however you want to define access technologies. That was the connecting point. That was the thing that would allow all of these things that we're talking about to happen. And it's interesting because, when I think about my grandfather and I think about, the railroad, the parallels were very similar. When you think about the basic proposition of a railroad, what is it? If it runs through your town, you can put cargo on it, right? In the old days, it was wood, coal, commodities of any type, and send it out to the next town, the next region, the next country, the next continent. And then you could trade, and your community would prosper. That was the fundamental proposition of the railroad. The new railroad is very much the same thing, except on this one, it takes you globally. So you can trade in Vietnam. You can start a web-based business and do business in Nunavut, north of the Arctic Circle. The cargo, however, is weightless. The cargo is ideas. The cargo is services, right? The cargo is made by innovation. And a university is a factory floor. It's a home for innovation. So it becomes very, very important in loading the new railroad for a local economy. I'll give you an example. The woman in the upper right-hand corner, she's a member of the Nunavut tribe again, north of the Arctic, 400 miles north of the Arctic Circle. That is a community that had 38% unemployment, high rates of alcoholism, social disintegration. Young people were leaving. But they decided, in a very, very remarkable way, to set up a broadband company to connect the 23 villages that made up the Nunavut tribe. And of course, they had to have a plan. They brought it in. It was done by satellite at the time. And the strategy was very simple. They make art that is unique in Canada and in North America. And they said, we're going to put this art on the internet and see what the heck happens. As it turns out, 19% of all art now purchased in Canada comes from the Nunavut tribe. So that idea, again, of a community being able to revive itself, was sort of proven anecdotally by the Nunavuts. So those are the types of things we're talking about. Okay. Having done all of this, we decided that we would ask questions about what happened to my community and whether we could make a difference in the world. And so we created the Intelligent Community Forum, and many people say the Intelligent Community Movement. Our goal is very simple. We're a social business, And we try to accomplish one thing. We try to energize communities for the 21st century. It's a very, very simple proposition, and it's based on one simple emotional expression, and that is that there's no place like home. You know, non c'è posto migliore più della mia casa, as my grandfather used to say. And once you believe and re-energize and reactivate your home, your city, your town, and start believing in it, then social capital gets created. Wonderful things can happen, and then you build on that. So that's really at the core of our mission. I mean, it's not very technological, is it? It doesn't sound terribly sophisticated in an academic environment, but it has great power in the world because everybody lives in a place they call home. So we decided we would try and understand what makes hometowns work. We do it in a couple of different ways. We have institutes that we're launching for the study of the intelligent community around the world. We have a community accelerator project where we go around the world and we show, we believe in emotional transportation. We tell stories about great communities to other communities to show them how they can become the next Arlington County or the next Columbus, Ohio, or the next Toronto. And as I said, we've been now called a movement, which is, you know, I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it's great. But here's how it works. We identify how a community gets something done. We look at good ones, right? We look at best practices, see how they get it done. We distill the best practices from it. We try to develop baselines. We share that knowledge with anybody that wants it, any community that wants it. And then we continue to ignite the movement. We continue to feed it out there. And we do that in a couple of different ways, including our awards program, which I'll talk about in a little while. Are we in the early stage of a new renaissance by doing all of this? We are beginning to see communities revive themselves. Yes, ma'am?
Give us a definition of intelligent community.
Sure, sure. An intelligent community is one that either through circumstances or deliberately has taken its destiny into its own hands using information technology as the core of the proposition to build itself forward, and then layers on intelligence on top of it. Now, I'll give you how that compares to what people call smart communities. Smart communities are when you have intelligent traffic management systems, lighting, the mechanical stuff, and that stuff works really well, but it doesn't activate human intelligence. We believe human intelligence is a natural resource. So what we try to do is get the smart stuff right and then layer knowledge on top of it and try to find a way to activate human intelligence to do the types of things that lead to the products and services that are necessary to create that weightless cargo I was telling you about. So as one of my colleagues says, smart cities, they work really well, but intelligent communities are great places to live. So they add a quality of life. Okay, and quality of life, as we know, is capital today. Does that answer it for you? Okay, and when I talk about the Renaissance, it's a good reference because Florence and those places were cities, right, that combined art, technology, commerce, and politics, and they all worked together in those days. And they were intelligent places that, you know, arguably launched 400 years of technological leadership in the West. We think we're seeing that today. And here's what's happening, and here's why. Connectivity is being seen as a new utility. And if you look at the most competitive economies in the world, they are ones with great telecommunications connectivity that offers it at a lower cost. The competitive indexes always have Singapore and South Korea and Sweden, right, as the most competitive economies on earth. Well, they think of broadband and some of this other stuff as a utility. They don't argue about who should pay for it. They just go and put it in because it's like arguing about or talking about the lights when you turn on a room. Well, who cares? You know, electricity is a fascinating thing. I grant you that, if any of you are electricians. But what's really important is what happens when the lights are on in the room. So that's why this utility is important. We're seeing the elimination of the middle of nowhere, which is, as I said earlier, means that you can live anywhere you want and participate in a global economy, but it also means people stay home. Because when somebody leaves a small community like I did, they take with them a lot of stuff. They take with them their ability to create social capital, to volunteer with their churches, to raise families, to create wealth, to give back. Now, these places that people call the middle of nowhere are being re-energized. People are staying home in places you never heard of, but that the World Wealth Report says will be the dominant cities of the 21st century. Suwon, Korea, Eindhoven, Holland, Waterloo, Ontario, places you never heard of, are beginning to dictate the terms of the new economy because of what they've been able to accomplish. Knowledge in universities are being repurposed. We've been discussing this, for about a day and a half, or, for a day and a half here. There's a brain gain effect, but again, the idea of knowledge, which was sort of once siloed, where a university was an ivory tower and it was sort of an entity unto itself, is being completely repurposed. And again, that goes back to sort of the original mission of the university. When you think about what the Benedictine monks did on the Monte Cassino in the 9th century, they said, we're going to push knowledge down into the communities. We're the educated class. We're the preservers of the knowledge. We're going to push it down into the communities and see what happens. Right? So the knowledge is flowing throughout the community. And you get this brain gain effect. As a result, when it's done right, the entire community becomes more enlightened. In Waterloo, Ontario, in Canada, they built something called the Perimeter Institute. It's an institute that studies quantum physics, right? And you would think to yourself, my God, who would go and hear a lecture at this place? They have a 400-seat theater. But because of their adaptation and their pride in being an intelligence community, they fill that theater continuously. They have, these are plumbers, these are bakers, these are parents. They go in and they listen to these lectures about string theory and dark matter because they now define themselves and they participate and they know their children's future depends on intelligence. So that's what's kind of happening, and it's, I think it's pretty cool. Here's something else that is driving this emergence. There's the emergence of culture and quality of life as an economic raw material and a natural resource. What do I mean by that? Go ahead.
Before we jump there, those plumbers and everybody who are listening to the quantum mechanic lecture, do we have any better quantum mechanic computer or something like that? Any outcomes and reported outcome?
Well, the Perimeter Institute that I'm speaking of is there to just prove Einstein's theories. It's a very theoretical place that was underwritten by one of the founders of BlackBerry. But what's happened is that now across the street at the University of Waterloo, quantum computing has become now a discipline. So now nanotechnology is becoming something that the kids are studying and that the community is interested in continuing to develop because they know that the next wave of businesses and entrepreneurs will be coming out of that space. So that is the practical effect. And I think, understanding the nature of the universe, I mean, it's not something I spend a lot of time thinking about at night. I'd rather watch the Yankees game, but actually a lot of people are interested in that. This idea of the emergence of culture and quality of life as economic raw material, it's a real interesting one to me. What is happening now is that we are looking for new sources of energy, right, in commodities. And we're discovering in these intelligent communities that it exists very, very close to us. It's right in our brain. And so what we're finding is that our cultural heritages, for example, I happen to be an Italian. You find in that culture things that are very, very unique, that have been invested in you for thousands of years. And if you can extract that using some of the processes that we've talked about here and that are actually being done here at this university and give it economic expression, you can create products and services almost on an endless basis. And that's a very, very deep innovation that is both theoretical at one level but is also happening in places. I was telling folks this morning when I went to Suwon, South Korea, the first thing they did was to take me to an archery range. I said, why on this site visit am I being taken to an archery range? I don't do archery, I don't bowl, I don't golf, I'm a New Yorker, right? I go to museums and restaurants. But they took me there, and everybody, the entire community, it looked like, was there. Little kids were out there hitting the archery targets. Elderly men were mentoring them. Men and women were doing this. And afterwards I said, why did you bring me here? What was the point of this exercise? And they said, we wanted to show you who we are as Koreans. We wanted to show you that, first of all, the reason we win all these gold medals in archery, they win all the time. They said, but most importantly, when we wanted to show you that our culture is very good at making fine things. And then they took me down the street, and guess what was down the street? Headquarters of Samsung, $265 billion company that does what? Electronics, fine things. They're very, very good at it. And they said, this is what we do culturally, and now we're going to be doing it economically into the future. And they kind of figured out a way to do that. But the awareness of that was driving a lot of innovation. And for me, the most exciting part of this is that cities and communities, as I said earlier, are beginning to seize their destiny. They can't do it alone. They can't do it alone. Cities are not just developing policy independently and going out and transforming their cities. They are working with their universities to do this. They are working with their private sectors to do this. They are working with their churches and their non-profit agencies to do this. But collectively they are saying, we are going to take the tribe back. We are going to tell ourselves a new story. And this is who we are going to be. And universities play a very significant role in that. I'll talk about Waterloo again. The University of Waterloo has an intellectual property policy where if you develop a technology, the university doesn't own it. If you develop it with your professor, you do. It's your stuff. And then they have an ecosystem where they send you out the back door and you can incubate that development and build a business around it. And if you go there, that's where BlackBerry was started. BlackBerry at its peak, it's obviously in trouble now, was a $62 billion company. Founded by two students at the University of Waterloo and their professor. While they were engineering students at the University of Waterloo, they went out, they stayed home, and they developed this company, which we know about. OpenText is there, which does a lot of work with your security agencies here. You know, you could have OpenText here, right? There's no reason it can't exist here, but it exists up there because of the ecosystem. Symantec is up there in Waterloo. In this little community, they only have 120,000 people. And in 2006, they produced 10% of all the publicly traded companies on the Toronto Stock Exchange. That's an intelligent community, right? And they go and listen to lectures on dark matter. They still drink too much beer. They still freeze in the winter. That's Canada. What can you do? But they're positioned very well for the future. Okay. How do you become an intelligent community? Okay, how do you become one of these places like we've been talking about? How do you become Arlington County, which was one of the world's top 7 communities for the second time this year? Well, we've looked at communities, we've studied them. We believe there are 5 basic criteria to becoming an intelligent community. The first one is the railroad. You got to have the broadband. You've got to have the infrastructure right. You've got that here, right? You've got the Arlington connection. The university has a network. So we look at that first and foremost. But that's only 20% of what makes a community intelligent. We then look at their workforce. Do they have a knowledge workforce? In other words, do they have a workforce that's doing work that layers knowledge on just about everything that's done? And the reason for that is very simple. We need pathways to the middle class. The middle class, especially in the United States, but globally, is being increasingly eviscerated by a lot of factors, technology being one of them. But you have to have a pathway to the middle class, and we are convinced, because of observation, that it is based on knowledge. President Reagan said in 1983 at Moscow University, the era of brawn over brain is over. Well, you know, 6 years later, there goes the Soviet Union, this big muscular superpower, right? Guess who wins? The guys with the brains. That's us, by the way, in case you were wondering. Peter Drucker, 70 years ago, said that, no longer will a person be able to find a pathway into the middle class by working, just with their physical self. They will have to use knowledge to move that way. So in intelligent communities, we look for the knowledge workforce. Where does it come from? Well, generally speaking, the universities play a significant role in creating that workforce. They're incubating entrepreneurs in places. They're educating the people. You're doing exactly what you do here and sending them out into the workforce. Hopefully you can keep them home. Because one of the challenges we see is you build your knowledge workers, but then they go someplace else. So does economic development, does the city have the capability of keeping them here? That's a big, big issue. Innovation, we look for innovation, and we look for it in the private sector, which the private sector does pretty good with innovation in most of these places, but where it's really important is in the government side. Does the government introduce innovation in the community? Does it really, allow citizens to spend, at a simple level, less time interfacing with government? Because that leads to more time spent doing other things in the community. Right? So again, these are things that we look for, we measure to yield an intelligent community. Digital inclusion is the fourth criteria. We believe on this ride, everybody's going to come along. We have a moral mandate to take care of the least among us, but it also has economic consequence if you do that. And we're finding in places like Eindhoven and other places that by reconnecting the elderly, for example, back to the community, they are serving as mentors. They are beginning to re-engage themselves in the local economies. And that's going to be really important in places like Japan and Europe, where you've got declining populations, aging populations. So you're going to have to figure out how to do that. And we look for it in these communities. Advocacy is the fifth thing we look for. How well do you tell your story, both to the outside world, because you can have a great place, but if nobody knows about it, they're not going to come in. But then increasingly important is how well do you tell your story to yourselves. And one of the things that is really, really good about intelligent communities is that they get everybody involved in the discussion about where they want to go, who they are. In Eindhoven, the university and the city and the private sectors are involved in bringing 23 communities together to an organization called Brainport, where they continuously go out and set goals in their industrial sector to achieve, again, economically at very high levels. But they keep telling their story to each other about who they are. In Waterloo, the mayor goes into the library and tells the children stories about the year they became the Intelligent Community of the Year. So these kids grow up and they say, hey, we live in an intelligent community. Let's act like it. That's a very important thing, believe it or not. Okay, so when these communities achieve at a very high level, we have a jury and we have a research company that evaluates them. We get about 400 submissions every year, and we come down to 7. These 7 from 2014 are listed here. You'll recognize one of them. You'll have heard about some of the others. But the reason Arlington County is there is because they were measured against those 5 criteria and were certainly not found wanting. Okay. So how do you create a great city? Senator Moynihan said, well, you build a great university and you wait 200 years. We don't think you can wait that long anymore. The universities, whether they're built or whether they exist, have to be activated now to make a great city. And it can happen, obviously, a lot faster than that. And so, what we're seeing is that the universities are getting involved in a lot of different projects that are enhancing those 5 criteria that we see. We don't think you can wait 200 years. The other thing I just want to point out is that we don't make distinctions anymore between large and small cities. You see that painting there? What we're seeing is that a place like this with 210,000 people? How much?
230.
230. They're actually becoming the go-to places. Because people are saying, you know, big cities, they're getting too big. Small places, you know, obviously have a lot of disadvantages. Rural places, you know, we're trying to work on that problem, but we haven't solved it yet. But it's these cities and communities that are 200, 300,000 where you have the density, you have the creative capabilities, you have the quality of life, you have the stimulation, yet they're not too big to sink you. Policies can get enacted and they can work. You feel closer to the government here, and the governments actually work. People really like that because it gives them the best of both worlds. It gives them, you know, the virtue of a city, and then in Arlington, which is a perfect example, you know, you use the metro line and you go outside where it's less dense. We're seeing that these cities are becoming much more desirable for investment purposes for companies to relocate than ever before. Okay, before I end, I'm going to give you some observed characteristics of intelligent communities. Before I'll ask, is there any questions? Does anybody need to know anything? Yes, ma'am.
Does the forum lobby governments or investors to invest in broadband in these communities? I mean, one of the things that seems pretty common is that your top 7 aren't going to be found in poor communities around the world. Where how did the natives inside the Arctic Circle get the resources to get satellite connectivity in order to move their community forward?
Yeah, provincial government helped them, and a university, interestingly enough. Yeah, it was, you know, they had to get helped to do it. But again, we think that's a perfectly natural role for government. I mean, it should be investing in infrastructure. You know, in the United States, we seem to still have this discussion about who should pay for broadband. You know, but you know, we asked the mayor of Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, do you make people pay for Wi-Fi? He says, why? I don't make them walk on the sidewalk. You know, you know, broadband is an essential infrastructure, right? And you know, again, without it, you're going to be at a disadvantage. People always, the example I always give is, tell me how much the Brooklyn Bridge cost. Well, I'll tell you how much it cost. In today's dollar, about $185 million. Now, you tell me, by connecting Manhattan to Brooklyn, how much economic activity has been generated. You can't count the number. It's too big. I mean, it's a lot, okay? But at the time, if you go read the newspapers, people were arguing about whether the government should be involved, whether this thing should get built, right? Within 5 years, they had to build another one. So, you know, you've got to get through that discussion, and the way a lot of communities are getting around it is by building municipal networks, and especially the smaller communities, because the carriers, the large carriers, won't touch it. And the way they get around it is they say, we're going to build a municipal network, but we're going to connect the hospitals, the schools, and the city government first. But, you know, they're very clever. They get that in, and then they start providing services that are lacking. And so the community ultimately gets all the broadband it needs. Any other questions? Yes, Dana.
Yeah, on the subject of infrastructure investment, you know, it's easy to look 20/20 hindsight and say, wow, that bridge was a good investment, right? And when you're looking forward, what are the key indicators that an investment in infrastructure is going to have that kind of, you know, payoff? Is it just like how much stuff it's connecting on either side? If you just add up the economic value on both sides of what's being connected and then multiply it by 2, or like looking forward when you have not all perfect information, what are the keys to a good investment versus a poor one?
You mean as you project forward, try to get a sense of what?
Yeah, because it's always easy to look backwards at the value of infrastructure investments. It's hard to look forward at the value of infrastructure investments.
Well, one way to ensure or hedge that bet, if you consider it a bet. I mean, I don't. It's like building the railroad. If you don't have it, I think you're going to be at a disadvantage. But it's to look, not build it first. You know, a lot of technology companies, no offense to IBM, would like to come in and sell you the stuff first, right? But the question then is, and that's why universities are really important in the discussion, what is the intelligence layer we're going to have over it? Which services are we going to provide on it? Which types of businesses are we going to create? You know, what's the university's role going to be in enabling knowledge workers? So you have to think about the economic implications of that. And then again, I think you can work backwards, or you can, well, one of the virtues of our organization is I've got 126 communities around the world that you can look at. And you can see how they've done it. You can see the mistakes they made. So if you make that investment now, you know, here's the mistakes you shouldn't make. But I really do, you know, and I'm almost obsessive about this. I really do think that champions from the university, the local government, private sector, and anybody else in the community really should meet regularly to talk about what's going to be going on their new railroad. They really need to think through what it means to be an intelligent community for the purposes of policy. And that collaboration is the secret sauce to the intelligent community movement. And the places that do it well, Canada, Holland, Taiwan, they are having success because they know how to collaborate. And they've worked out processes and systems. The Canadians are actually studying this stuff. They study collaboration. They study better forms of collaboration because they know that that's part of the machinery that goes into creating, you know, a great community, a community of light. And there's no better institution in the world than a university to enable dialogue. It's kind of what it does. You know, people always say, well, all those eggheads do is talk. Well, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do when it comes to this stuff. So it's a really important component. But I think, again, as with anything else, the degree to which you communicate and plan and understand the layers of intelligence you want on that network are a lot more important than what you put in the ground. Don't put it in the ground first and expect them to come. A lot of people have made that mistake, and nothing's happened. You know, well, we put in broadband, then our economy will improve. It doesn't really happen that way. Anybody else? Okay. Oh, wow. Here's some observed characteristics of intelligent communities. They have inspirational leadership, but leadership really is important. In Issy-les-Moulineaux, you have a mayor who's been there for 20 years, and he decided at one point that he would do something that was unthinkable in France. He would outsource his city's information technology and services. He said, the services stink, we're going to outsource them, we're going to build a broadband infrastructure, and we're going to use an American model to bring in technology companies, and we're going to build a technology corridor here in Issy-les-Moulineaux. That was a very specific decision by the mayor. The unions battled him on it, but he won the day, and Issy-les-Moulineaux became the headquarters for Microsoft in Europe. It's their second largest campus outside of Redmond, Washington. Even today, and this is France, they have more people than jobs to fill them. And that's because of one leader with everybody else following along. Walla Walla, Washington. You been to Walla Walla lately? It's a great place. The president of their Chamber of Commerce quit his job as a big shot entertainment lawyer in LA, came home and said, I'm going to build the quality of life play here. I've got the broadband, I've got the #1 ranked community college in America, according to the Aspen Institute. He said, and I've got a great wine industry. I'm going to ramp them up, and I'm going to do the quality of life play. He says, people are going to come here to do business. And sure enough, he's created 6,000 jobs out there. Food, entertainment. He's got New York chefs moving out there to work. Chamber of Commerce, right? So somebody went home, wanted to make their hometown better. Taichung, Taiwan, we know a little bit about. They gave me this tie, God bless them. Another leader who just has now formed or enabled an alliance between 23 of their universities. They have 23 universities there and their private sector, and they're working together endlessly on collaborations to create new products and services for the 90% of tablets and notebooks and computers that move through Taiwan. What's the result? Taiwan Semiconductor just decided to build a $5 billion chip manufacturing plant. They're the third largest exporter of precision machinery on Earth. But not only that, he's cleaned up his environment. They've got something called the Calligraphy Greenway. He wants to make it Taiwan's New York to Taipei's Washington, because he says culture is going to be what actually draws the people that I want here to Taiwan in the future. He's built the largest opera house in Asia there, and he's a real champion. And they also have one good university. If you look at every one of these places, they have one good school like that. Another thing is the Triple Helix. Again, Eindhoven, Holland is worth taking a look at. Stratford, Ontario, Justin Bieber's hometown, right?
Luke,
Yep.
before you leave the first bullet,
Yeah, sure.
what's the difference between the one political champion and the inspirational leadership? It could be the same person, or what's the distinction?
No, I think in many cases it is, but the political leadership is someone who just is able to drive policy and vision through and work with all the necessary constituents to sell it. But the inspirational leader can come from someplace else. I think in Waterloo, it was the university president, David Johnston. I mean, he had so much passion for that city and what it could be that he was willing to just go out and really sell this thing. And as a result, he became Governor General of Canada. He had such success. But I think inspiration can come from any source. This triple helix is kind of an important element. It's really a collaboration between local government, private sector, and the academic institutions. And the Dutch talk about it as a new helix, right? It's a new strand to create a new type of community layered on the old community, right? At the Intelligent Community Forum, we don't really do anything new. We give a new voice to the old truths. One of them is that, community is important, but what we're seeing now is that because of the way the economy functions, the way it gets disintermediated, right? Jobs get just flattened. For every job you create, 3 get lost. You need to create this new strand of DNA so that the 3 entities referred to here are constantly collaborating and thinking of ways to build not only new jobs, create new jobs, but to build new industries. And again, these things can emerge from universities. Universities are going to be the laboratories for the new industries that emerge, because they're able to take the risk, they're able to do the research, they're able to have the discussion, they're the honest broker. And I'm telling you, that's really important, because we're going to continue to lose jobs. Chinese are just beginning to experience this. My wife works in the fashion industry, and they used to outsource all the manufacturing to China, right? No more. Cost of labor's gone up. Technology's disintermediating. Fewer people doing the jobs now. And the work's going to Vietnam and these places. China's experiencing the same problems that we have. We manufacture just as much stuff as China. We just do it with 8 people less, per product. So you have to think about this triple helix in terms of creating brand new industries that are going to create 4, 5, 600,000 jobs at a shot. That's the only way you get back to full employment, despite what President Obama and others tell you. The other thing that is very near and dear to me is that Stockholm, Sweden, when they plan any type of program, they think about the human environment first. They think about one individual, they put one individual there and they say, how will this impact he or she? What will happen if we make this decision to their lives? And that's how they start their planning. That's how they did their 2030 plan. But they talk about sustainability. They talk about innovation, creativity, and collaboration as core competences for their workforce. And again, these are very specific individual characteristics that you have to activate. IBM did that. Where's the woman from IBM? Yeah, you guys did that study a couple years ago. You surveyed 1,500 CEOs of major corporations around the world, and you asked them what the number 1 core competence would be for their managers. And they came back and they said creativity, which just kind of blew me away. Because you would think, with IBM it would be technological competence, the ability to do M&As and deals. It was creativity, which means that the modern workforce is going to have to act and function a lot more like Picasso than it does, the old guy in the manufacturing plant. That's remarkable, but Sweden thinks about that. They sort of worship creativity. Another important thing here is just stop competing with others, start competing with yourselves. You know, these cities are always looking, well, you know, Roslyn, they're going after this company, and geez, I'm worried about this city next to me. Forget that. Stop competing with others, start competing with yourselves is what we tell communities. If you do your work, if you do what you're supposed to do and transform your community and make it a community of light, people are like moths. They'll gravitate to the light. They'll fly right toward it. Okay, I'm not going to go too much into this because I've been talking a long time here. But here's a list of the Intelligent Communities of the Year that we've designated from 1999 forward. And again, to a community, you will find a great university and educational system working in concert with local government and the private sector. And they have all gone through, like Arlington County, our very rigorous awards program. This is the last slide. We believe the chief object of education is not to learn things, but to unlearn them. And we believe that that's the path to enlightenment. And to the degree that we can follow, when I was in Korea, I asked, what's the essential, what's the essence of Buddhism? You know, because you go over there and they take you into temples and stuff. Same in Japan. They said, Buddhism, very simple. You have to become stupid. You have to unlearn. But you have to realize one thing. The only constant is change. You get that right, you don't suffer so much, Mr. Zacharilla. So I take that back to my communities. I say, don't suffer so much. Unlearn. Don't resist change. Communicate as much as you can. And just don't forget why you're here. These communities exist. Arlington and its leadership exists for one reason, so that when someone comes home, either in this generation or the one to come, and they walk into their apartment or their house at night, they look up, you want them to say to themselves, there's no place like home. I'm glad Arlington County is my home. That's what we do. So thank you for your attention. Congratulations on being an intelligent community. Any questions? Yeah. Dana?
Question. I didn't write it down. You said that culture was the raw material?
Yeah. Natural resource or raw material.
Culture as a natural resource. I'm thinking broadly here. Is there a quantification strategy for the value of culture? Because it's kind of, it makes total sense, right? But then culture is the water we swim in. So it's hard to point, say, that's the culture, that's the culture, that's the culture. So when we try to think about investing in culture, whether it's the arts or just the walkability, or there's so many aspects that make up culture. Is there any sort of ROI on it? Is there any way to bring it down to some kind of metric? I'm trying to channel Nick here.
Yeah.
To look at a metric that, like, this kind of investment in the culture is likely to have good payoff.
It's a good question. Susan Sirocco, you don't measure it at all, but you'd answer that question, then I'll give you mine.
Say that. Yes, that is, Dana's going to be hearing a lot more about that. In collaboration with in the university, I'm optimistic about that. But it is definitely something that has been underutilized as a resource and a tool, both from the policymaking and the planning capacity. And the creative arts and culture in general has had a really tough time getting their heads around keeping data about the value of what they bring to a community. We've had some pieces of that have largely stemmed from economic prosperity and amenities that come from arts being in a particular community. But to Dana's point, there's a lot to be discovered about how culture really impacts and has a place in a community that can influence a lot of other components. So yeah, to be
Yeah, I suppose the real answer right now is no. But I'm sure, there's ways you can back yourselves into looking at an investment in your Philharmonic or whatever it happens to be, your theaters, and see how much they add to local gross domestic product in terms of tourism dollars and that kind of stuff. But what I'm talking about, more importantly, is developing a capability. So you're investing in a capability to allow people to think in a nonlinear fashion, which enables a type of creativity that's going to be, as IBM demonstrated, absolutely critical to the workforce. So it's actually transforming the way people think about their jobs, and that creativity is not something you go and observe in a museum. You got Ryan Holiday and those people here, and they got a really interesting idea for the artisphere. They go in there and they say that we're not going to present art that people look at. We're going to teach this community how to deconstruct, to look at how art is made. We really are going to show you how sausage is made here. So that investment in the artisphere, now again, I don't know if you can ever demonstrate this in dollars and cents in ROI, but what they're saying is that we want to create a community that functions and has confidence creatively. Rollo May wrote that great book, The Courage to Create. If you don't have that, it's very hard to have entrepreneurship. I'm an entrepreneur. I can tell you, I had guts. I was nuts, but I had overcome my fear. But I wasn't quite always thinking logically, but I was thinking creatively. I wasn't afraid of my ideas, and I had confidence that my ideas would propel me to success. It is really, really important for the arts to be available as that instrument. If for some reason it unlocks that. That's not a great answer, but I think that's what's going on. I think that's the truth of it.
What you're arguing for is a redefinition of culture and creativity as part of it. Because I think you're using the word culture differently than a lot of us are used to hearing it.
Yeah.
Which is totally valid.
Yeah, the New York Times has that section called Arts and Leisure. I always hate that. It's like, art is what you do when you're sitting back and falling asleep on the couch. Well, no, art is something that's actively, doing something in you that will allow you to give something back. As Governor Cuomo used to say in New York, when the New York Public Schools decided to take out music and arts in the school, he said, "This is great." He says, "We're going to create a generation of kids who hear the sound of a gunshot before they hear the sound of an orchestra." Well, we know that has consequences, but can we measure them? I'd love to. I'd love to see how we can do that. Yeah.
So on the 5 criteria that you use to judge intelligent communities, which aspect do you find the communities have the hardest time achieving?
Well, it depends on the community, but generally speaking, it's advocacy. They don't tell their story well. I think that's why we're so popular. Because, again, I never, our awards are kind of the tail that wags the dog. What we really do is we collect a lot of data. These people have to submit to us data at least twice, and then experience a site visit from me so that, I can use all this stuff for our research. But I find that being part of an awards program is important to them because it gives them an opportunity to tell their story to the world. And then I get in there and I see, well, they're not really telling it well beyond what I'm doing. I have to come in and give them an award for them to go out and communicate this. And advocacy internally. For some reason, and I think it's just because when we live close to each other on a daily basis, it's like your family, right? You really hate your family. I can't wait to get away from my family. I love them. But, when you're close to someone, silos go up. Sometimes they're psychological, but we don't necessarily tend to communicate as well as we do and tell our stories to each other. But you have to remember something. We're tribal beings. We persist on our own myths. The stories we tell each other and reinforce to each other yields who we are. And if we can all agree on the same story, and again, we're very rapidly reinventing myths for ourselves, some of them really good, some of them really bad. If we can get those right and continuously tell them to each other in a lot of different ways, and this is where culture is important, but so is the meeting with the university, the private sector, and the local government, then we'll do better because we'll all be on the same page. So I think our awards program actually gives people a concentration so that they can break down their barriers. It's like a football team, I guess, or a baseball team. They want to win the World Series. It's like the Yankees in the 1970s. Those guys all hated each other, but they wanted to win the World Series, so they were willing to play with each other. They had a common goal. Becoming an intelligent community has become a common goal for cities around the world. But what they find when they get into it is it's not just the award. Yeah, the award has merits. It supports a lot of things, maybe bond ratings. I don't know. But the real virtue is that you enter into a process that allows you to continuously perform SWOT analysis of yourself. So you're always going to have to look at those 5 criteria. And if you bring people together who have never really communicated before, and I know that he's doing stuff, over in economic development, and he's doing stuff at the university, I've got a new dialogue started. And that unleashes power. That unleashes things. So, but communities don't do it as well as you would think. Eindhoven does it great. Waterloo does it great. Some of the Canadian communities do it great. The Taiwanese are unbelievable at it, but not everybody else.
So like a marketing advertising campaign.
Well, that's one part of it. I think that's the external advocacy. Telling your story. Yeah.
I would just say that I think what you're really saying underneath the advocacy is intentionality. Like the award gives people an intention, we want to win that award. But if the intentionality is weak, then there's nothing to advocate for, right? So when you have a strong intention, we want to achieve award, we want to build an infrastructure, we want to attract a certain kind of economy, then there's a pull towards something. And I agree with you that the universities are a great place to have the discussion about what do we intend, what is most important for us to achieve. And I notice that when I think back in terms of what the county or anybody else can do, it's nurture that intentionality and create it. Because without it, there's nothing to pursue.
Yeah. Again, it's very simple. Nobody can disagree with the fact that they want to be named one of the world's 7 most intelligent places. Right? Nobody would really argue that, and especially if it doesn't really cost you that much or nothing. It's a common goal worth pursuing because there's bragging rights to it. So for sure, that's the intentionality. But I'll tell you this university, it's an amazing place. I mean, really, you've got some big thinkers here. You're studying social cohesion. You're studying all these things. They are perfectly positioned to be a significant arbiter in the dialogue about where this county goes. It's just a wonderful thing to have as a resource that's available.
I want to second that,
I thought you might.
My question is the things you've described and the examples have talked about all these things in an abstract way, but to what extent is place important and design important? And I think when we think about what makes a community come together, it's also those public squares and those places where people collide and have these random conversations and things. And I've always felt that that's something universities provide through these campuses and seminars like this. And how important, as you've gone around the world, is how important is design and place in the success of this kind of community?
Yeah, but it's very important. Our 6th criteria this year is planning. We call it the revolutionary community, but it's about planning that. And there's this whole discussion about how do you plan for serendipity, right? For the aha moment. How do you enable it? And there's a lot of theories about that. One of the communities in Australia, one of the guys from Whittlesea, was very passionate about a Gaudi book. And so he gave me the book. You know what the book was about? Sidewalks. The importance of sidewalks in enabling people to meet. So the answer to the question is it's very important. But I think at the end of the day, the university, again, is an enabler. It brings together the people that allow this explosion to take place. So the question is, how do you create that environment here, at a lot of different levels, and then have some systematic way for keeping it going out into the economy. And that may be the sort of the missing link here. And some of these other communities, University of Tilsonburg in Holland and some of these places, Oulu University, they do it really well. They get the stuff that happens and they get it out into the economy. They give it economic expression. Is that too abstract, Nick, or is that?
That's a little abstract,
I'm at a university. Aren't I allowed to be abstract? Well, no, but we can go a layer deeper on it, but.
Well, I'm thinking about, to Nick's point, I was walking over to get breakfast and salad at lunchtime, and there's an open public space that is surrounded by several restaurants, and I can't think of the street that it is, but it's where Cosey's is, and all that, Zacharilla and all of that. It's the square there, and people were sitting and milling because it's sitting in the shade, having their lunch, and serendipity, absolute planned serendipity. How do you do that? Really having access to those ingress, egress, open, available. People can mill around, take a seat if they want to, just spur of the moment, if you will. Step out. There are benches along the way as well, and so it's the design. The design is very critical to that. If that grass were not there, if those benches were not there, if those seats. I actually saw some signage. I think the bid may have something to do with this. Some signage that invited people to take a seat at this elevated chair, and I wanted to walk up to her and say, "What is that about?" But again, inviting conversation, inviting inquiry. That's why I keep coming back to we are a living laboratory.
Mhm.
Our environment is a living laboratory where we get the opportunity to coexist and to bump into one another, to have these moments of serendipity where we are just, oh, here you are. I wanted to talk with you. I said that to Kenneth earlier. I needed to speak with him, and here he is. These opportunities to converge upon one another, to gather and to meet. It's a deliberate thought around the humanness, the human activity with that, and allowing and encouraging it, and not cutting it off. And I mentioned Jane Jacobs. I just kind of said it.
Yeah.
But that definitely is her bend on that. And I remember growing up, and we didn't have the bushes that I had to walk around because it wouldn't invite me to enter into that space. It was wide open. I could just simply, again, egress, ingress were very available to us. So those kinds of things, and it made a difference. I noticed that today as I was walking around. It was incredible. Again, a living environment that we interact with every day, and how are we paying attention to it, and what are we doing as a result to make sure that it continues, that we stand it, that we talk about it, and make sure it's known as an amenity, quote unquote, but more than that, as a way of life for who Arlington is. And I think that's what we want to get to.
Yeah, and by the way, technology doesn't inhibit that. I even have a bias. I said, gee, because my niece is always complaining, I can't meet a guy. And I said, she's she's beautiful. And I said, well, you always got your head down. I said, in New York, like really good looking guys are walking past you all the time. But that's actually, turns out that's really not true. That's right, they're not that good looking. Or she isn't, but I think she's beautiful. But they're finding that where there's Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi and access, people are actually congregating more. And they're doing more socializing. So it's actually an enabler.
And their phones are pointing at each other, and they walk up and they look.
That's right. That's right.
One more question.
Yeah, I saw a couple of hands up, but go ahead.
This
Sir?
is a little bit informed, but how does that really, Fairfax Chamber Workforce Development meeting last week? One of the things that the State Secretary of Commerce and Trade said is Northern Virginia does not have its act together as far as industry, government, some of the educational institutions, as far as addressing workforce. So in the 120 or so cities that you looked at,
Yeah.
and the winner was Hampton Roads, in his opinion, the winner was the Hampton Roads Newport News area as far as them driving to a successful growth strategy there. But in 120 areas that you looked at, and looking at intelligent communities, what did the regions look like economically around them? How many workers were displaced? Did the universities and educational institutions work on educating the workforce? And that's where I'm starting to be informed.
Yeah, well, it depends where you look. In Holland,
I would assume the 7 winners have a fair region reach or a fairly affluent and with good jobs and
Not always. And
an economy that's somewhat booming, no matter what the industry is there.
not always. It's interesting. Not always. In some cases, yes. I mean, when you talk about Eindhoven, but they deliberately put together this organization called Brainport, which is 23 cities and all its universities and companies sort of working in harmony on a common goal, which is, you know, to take automotive design and design in general to the next level. So there, that part of Holland, that's that sort of Ruhr Valley area, they'll outperform the entire Dutch economy's GDP by 1.5%. And so they've consciously activated the region. That's policy. Riverside, California, in 2012 was our Intelligent Community of the Year. They were doing pretty good. Their unemployment rate was still a little high, but they had done so many things well. They'd rebuilt their schools, activated UC Riverside, you know, as a partner with the city, built new libraries. I mean, they did all of this stuff. Brought in a CIO from Dell, but next door, San Bernardino, was just a mess. So it hadn't spread out yet. So it really depends where you are. You would think that there would be a natural ripple effect, but again, given the political structure, you know, given the unique cultural circumstances, not always. In Taiwan, I'll go back to Taiwan because I've been using sort of these examples today. The city and the rural areas around the city are actually part of the same municipality, which I think is quite brilliant because the mayors have a responsibility not just to enhance the growth of the cities, they have to enhance the growth of the rural countryside as well. And so there you do see, you know, not as much prosperity, but you at least don't see the rural sectors getting cut off from the cities. And if you go up into the hills, Nick, you'd love this. They have like companies that, for example, are innovating on orchids. They're experimenting with the genetic qualities of orchids. They're developing new anti-disease agents, and they're creating like these beautiful different variations of orchids, and they ship them all over the world. You know, and so they're connected back to their university. So there it works. The schools, you know, are as modern as the ones in the city, but not always, not always.
So I know there may be some more questions, but
Michelle, I think.
some more food out there too. So
Okay.
let's give Lou another.
Yeah. Thank you.